Hey everyone! I've noticed that many of you are enjoying the videos, but most of you haven't subscribed yet. We're super close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support could help us reach that milestone. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really makes a huge difference and helps us keep creating more awesome content. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. It's a Wednesday evening, the kind that melts into every other weekday, a soft blur of routines. We're sitting at the dinner table, Emily, Evan, and me. The house smells like baked chicken, the faint hum of the dishwasher mixing with the clinks of silverware. To anyone else, it would look perfect. Domestic bliss. But there's something else beneath the surface. An itch I can't quite scratch. Emily's laughing at something Evan said. Her laugh, once my favorite sound in the world, now feels rehearsed, hollow. It's like watching a scene in a movie you've already seen 100 times and you know exactly how it ends. I stare at her, trying to place what's changed. She looks the same, acts the same, but there's a distance. I feel like I'm seeing her through frosted glass. Something's off and I can't shake it. And then Evan drops a bomb. Dad, I was telling my other dad about the park today, he says, his fork poking at the mashed potatoes. Casual, innocent. I freeze. The air in the room thickens, my heartbeat suddenly louder than the ticking of the clock on the wall. Other dad? I glance at Emily, but she doesn't react. Not right away, at least. Her hand stiffens for just a split second, a flicker of tension I'd have missed if I hadn't been watching so closely. She recovers too quickly. Evan, sweetie, what do you mean by other dad? Her voice is calm, too calm, like she's in control of a conversation she's rehearsed. Evan looks up, oblivious to the storm brewing in my chest. You know, Mommy, sometimes I talk to him. He takes me places too. Her laugh is forced, strained. Oh, honey, you must have had a dream. She leans in, ruffles his hair. You only have one daddy. The words are light, playful, but I hear something else. Panic. I don't push it, not yet. I sit there, holding my breath, keeping my face neutral. Inside, I'm piecing together fragments of conversations, old memories, small things I've ignored for months. Emily's late nights at work, the way she's been pulling away from me, her sudden attachment to her phone, always turned face down on the table. It doesn't take a genius to see the pattern. It's been staring me in the face, but I've been too stupid, or maybe too scared, to acknowledge it. I chew slowly, trying to focus on the taste of the chicken, but it feels like sandpaper in my mouth. Evan's back to talking about school now, oblivious to the cold tension spreading across the table. Emily smiles, and it's like she's trying to convince both of us that everything is fine. But the smile doesn't reach her eyes. I can see the cracks now. Thin, spidering cracks beneath the surface. She thinks she's covered her tracks, but our sun just lit the first fuse. I let the evening play out. We finish dinner, clean up, tuck Evan into bed. All the while I'm watching her, my mind churning. She's careful, too careful. Every gesture, every word is rehearsed. I used to admire how composed she was, how nothing rattled her. Now I see it for what it is, a mask. By the time she slides into bed beside me, her back turned, I know. I don't need evidence. Not yet. The truth is already there, festering like a wound. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of it pressing down on my chest. My wife is sleeping beside me, but she's a stranger now. And I need to find out who the man is that Evan thinks of as his other dad. Over the next few days, the feeling grows like a slow poison, corroding everything. I try to keep my routine, work, gym, errands, but everything feels warped, tainted. I watch her more closely. Emily's perfect smile, her easy conversations with the neighbors, her quick goodbye kisses. All of it feels like a performance now. How long has she been playing this part, pretending everything's fine? The phone is the first sign. She's always been on it, but now it's different. I notice how she holds it closer to her, how she steps into the other room for calls, whispering. I see her on the back porch one evening, phone pressed to her ear, pacing, speaking too softly for me to hear. When I step outside, she hangs up quickly, smiling at me like I'm interrupting something innocent. Just work stuff, she says. Always work stuff. But it's not. I know it's not. Her body too. She doesn't touch me the same way anymore. The way she pulls away when I kiss her goodnight, the way she lies stiff beside me in bed, distant. We haven't been close in months. We make excuses, busy schedules, long days. But it's more than that. I feel it in the space between us, in the way she avoids eye contact when we talk about the future. And I can't stop thinking about Evan's words. My other dad. The words gnaw at me day and night, pushing me toward the edge of something I'm not ready to confront. One evening, after another awkward dinner, Emily says she's going to bed early. She doesn't look tired, just tired of me. The same way she's looked for months. I wait until I hear her close the bedroom door before I go into the office, sitting down at my desk. I pull up the security footage. Months ago, I'd installed cameras for safety, or at least that's what I told Emily. Suburbs aren't what they used to be, I'd said. But deep down, maybe I'd already known something was wrong. Maybe I'd been preparing for this moment without realizing it. I start scrolling through the footage, going back weeks. At first, everything's normal. Days blend into nights. Emily picking up Evan, coming home from work, our regular lives playing out on the grainy screen. I'm almost ready to shut it down, convince myself that I'm paranoid, that it's all in my head. And then I see it. It's late afternoon. I'm at work. Emily's home, and Evan's at school. I watch as a car I don't recognize pulls into the driveway. My stomach tightens. She walks out to meet him. She's laughing the way she used to laugh with me. The man steps out of the car, tall, broad-shouldered, confident. He wraps an arm around her waist like he's done it 1,000 times before. Like it's his right. They don't kiss, but the intimacy is unmistakable. She leads him inside. I pause the footage, my fingers shaking on the mouse. My head is spinning, the room tilting, but I force myself to keep watching. Fast forward. He's there for over an hour. When he leaves, she's smiling, her hair tousled in a way I haven't seen in years. I sit there, staring at the frozen image of her standing in the doorway as he drives away. My chest feels hollow, like I'm being pulled into a vacuum, unable to breathe. I knew. On some level, I've known for months. But seeing it, watching her with him, it's like being punched in the gut by a freight train. I close the laptop slowly, leaning back in my chair. The weight of it settles in my bones. My hands are cold, clammy. I should be furious, I should feel something, anything, but all I feel is empty, numb. I sit there for what feels like hours, staring at nothing, the faint hum of the house filling the silence. Emily is in bed, probably asleep by now, oblivious to the storm that's gathering inside me. But I don't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I begin to plan. The next few days are a blur. I go through the motions, work, home, dinners with Emily and Evan. All the while, the footage replays in my head like a loop, his hand on her waist, her laugh, their ease with each other. It doesn't matter who he is. What matters is what comes next. Emily doesn't suspect a thing. She still smiles at me like everything's fine, still kisses me goodbye in the morning like nothing's changed. But everything has. She just doesn't know it yet. I watch her closely now, waiting for the right moment. I won't confront her, not like this. She doesn't deserve the satisfaction of knowing how much she's hurt me. No, I'll play my part, just like she's played hers. The revelation hits me like ice water every time I think about it, but it doesn't break me. If anything, it strengthens my resolve. I won't fall apart over this. I won't let her see me suffer. She thinks she's won, that she's gotten away with it, but I'm not the man she thinks I am. I'm about to show her who I really am. I can't stop thinking about it. Every glance, every word from Emily feels heavier now, loaded with the weight of betrayal I haven't yet confronted her with. But it's not time for that. No, I need more. More than just a single clip of footage. More than a vague suspicion brought on by a few careless words from our son. I've started watching her in a way that I hadn't before. Before, I'd see her as my wife, someone I trusted without question, without hesitation. Now I notice every detail, every small change in her habits. Her smile doesn't light up her eyes like it used to. Her body language is closed off, defensive. The way she holds her phone closer to her chest now, the way she avoids sitting too close to me on the couch. I start picking up on the micro movements, the nervous tics she's developed, like she knows something's coming but doesn't want to admit it to herself. The worst part is how much she still plays her role, how seamless the lie is. In the mornings, she kisses me goodbye like always, her lips brushing mine as if nothing is wrong. But I feel the coldness now. It's like kissing a statue. There's nothing behind it. She leaves the house with Evan, sending him off to school with the same affection she used to give me. When she leaves, I sit in the kitchen, nursing my coffee, feeling the bitterness of it curl inside me. It's the same bitterness that's been growing for weeks now. I keep my routine. Go to work, come home. I don't let her see that I know. I don't let her catch on to the fact that every time she turns away from me, I'm watching her like a hawk. I don't have to talk much anymore. I just observe. One afternoon, I come home early from work. She's not expecting me. I've told her I had a meeting that would run late. The house is quiet when I walk in, but I hear her voice, muffled, coming from the kitchen. I move quietly, slipping into the hallway. She's on the phone. I don't hear much, just snippets, but the tone of her voice is light, easy, too easy. The way she used to sound when we were still in love, back before everything started feeling like a charade. I don't step into the room. I don't let her know I'm there. I just stand in the hallway, letting the sickness of her betrayal wash over me. When she hangs up, I slip back out of the house, returning to work like nothing ever happened. I don't confront her, not yet. I don't have enough, and I can't afford to tip my hand too soon. That evening, I come home at the time I told her I would. Dinner is ready, and she's sitting with Evan, laughing at something he said. I join them, forcing myself to play along, to keep the mask in place. But inside, I'm burning with every fake smile she flashes. Later that night, as she sleeps beside me, I can't stop thinking about the man in the footage. The way he touched her, the way she smiled up at him, like I didn't even exist, like I'd never mattered. I need to know who he is, but more than that, I need to know if there's more, if this is just the tip of the iceberg. It's late when I slip out of bed and head back to my office. I sit in front of the computer, scrolling through more footage. Days blend into nights, and I fast forward through hours of nothing. Just empty rooms, Emily cooking dinner, playing with Evan, our regular life on screen. But then I find another clip. It's the same car, the same man. This time, they're bolder. She doesn't wait for Evan to be at school. He's upstairs, probably playing video games or watching TV. The man pulls into the driveway like he belongs there, like this is his home too. Emily's waiting for him by the door and she doesn't waste a second. They don't kiss, but the way they move together, the way her body leans into his, it's more intimate than a kiss. He's only there for a little while, 30 minutes tops. But it's enough. Enough to push me past the point of no return. I shut off the footage, my mind racing. Who the hell is this guy? How long has this been going on? Is it just him, or are there others? The questions swirl, but the rage is cold now, calculated. I won't confront her, not yet. I need more than just a few hours of footage. I need everything. Over the next few days, I focus on Evan. I watch him, listen carefully to his stories. He doesn't know. He's just a kid, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing between his parents. But there are moments, little comments that keep pulling at the thread of my suspicion. One night, while I'm tucking him in, he asks, "Dad, do you know my other dad?" I freeze for a second, but I force myself to stay calm. "What do you mean, buddy?" He shrugs, pulling the blanket up to his chin. "Mommy said he's someone special, but I don't see him much, just sometimes." I asked her about it, and she said it's a grown-up thing. My jaw tightens, but I keep my voice steady. "When did you see him?" Evan looks thoughtful for a second. "A few times. I saw him once when we went to the store." He gave me a hug. The image of some stranger hugging my son, my boy, makes my stomach turn. But I can't show it. I can't let Evan see the anger rising in me. "Do you remember his name?" I ask, keeping my voice casual. Evan shakes his head. "No." He doesn't talk much. I tuck him in and kiss his forehead, telling him goodnight, but inside I'm unraveling. Emily's gone further than I'd imagined. This isn't just an affair. She's introduced our son to him, let him into our family's life. That realization breaks something inside me. I walk out of Evan's room and head downstairs, my hands shaking as I pour myself a drink. The bourbon burns on the way down, but it does nothing to dull the fire in my chest. I can't sit still anymore. I need to know. I need to see it with my own eyes. That night, when Emily goes to bed, I make sure she's asleep before I slip out of the house. I drive to a 24-hour pharmacy and buy a DNA test kit. The next morning, while Emily is distracted in the kitchen, I swab Evan's cheek as he sits at the table, still half asleep. He doesn't ask questions. He's used to me being quiet, methodical. I package the swab and slip it into my bag, ready to send it off the first chance I get. The days pass slowly, filled with the same lies, the same routine. But now, I feel like I'm living in two different worlds. In one, I'm still playing the part of the husband and father, keeping up appearances. In the other, I'm unraveling the lie she's built, pulling at the thread until it all comes apart. The DNA results arrive faster than I expect. I sit at my desk, staring at the email notification on my screen. I open it, my heart hammering in my chest. The results are blunt, clinical. 99.9% chance I am not the biological father. I feel the floor drop out from under me. It's one thing to suspect, to piece together the evidence. But seeing it there, in black and white, confirmation that the boy I've raised, the boy I've loved, isn't mine. It's a punch to the gut I wasn't prepared for. I sit there for what feels like hours, staring at the screen, the truth sinking into my bones. I don't cry. I don't scream. The rage I expected to feel doesn't come. Instead, it's something colder, something darker. I close the email and lean back in my chair, the gears in my mind already turning. Emily has lied to me for years. She's let me believe that Evan was mine. She's let another man, multiple men maybe, into our home, into our lives. But she won't get away with it. Not this time. Not anymore. I stand up, moving through the house silently. Emily is in the backyard with Evan, her laughter floating in through the open windows. I watch them for a moment, feeling the weight of what I'm about to do settle over me. But there's no turning back now. I retreat to the office, closing the door behind me. I grab the folder I've been slowly filling with every piece of evidence, screenshots, photos, copies of the DNA test results, everything. I lay it all out on the desk in front of me, staring at the mess of papers that will be her undoing. This is just the beginning. I'll watch her world burn before I let her take anything else from me. I didn't confront Emily right away. I wasn't ready. It wasn't enough to simply know the truth. I needed more. I needed to pull apart her life thread by thread in the same way she had unraveled mine. First, I gathered more evidence. I couldn't just act on a few clips in a DNA test. I wanted to destroy her in every way possible, and that meant making sure I had airtight proof for when I was ready to strike. So I installed more cameras, tiny ones, hidden in the places she would never think to look. The corners of the bedroom, the kitchen, even the car. Every inch of our life, or at least what was left of it, was under surveillance. I also hacked into her phone. It wasn't hard. She always used the same password for everything. Our wedding date, ironically enough. Once inside, I combed through months of messages, photos, emails. What I found was worse than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just one man. There were others. Some were just flirty texts, but others, there were photos, explicit ones, messages that made my skin crawl. Emily had been playing me for years. The worst part was how normal it all seemed to her. The way she carried on these affairs with the ease of someone who knew she would never get caught. I read through message after message, seeing the same pattern repeat. The sweet beginning, the escalating flirtation, the inevitable physical encounter. And then, always, a sudden coldness when things went too far, when the other man wanted more than she was willing to give. She was playing them too. But I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Not the way I should have been. It was almost clinical, the way I combed through the evidence, cataloging each betrayal with cold precision. This was no longer about emotions or pain. This was about control, about dismantling everything she thought she could hide from me. The next step was financial. I dug through our bank accounts, checking statements, looking for discrepancies. And of course, they were there. Small charges at restaurants I'd never heard of, hotel rooms I'd never stayed in, gifts I'd never received. She had been using our money to fund her lies, her affairs, and she hadn't even bothered to cover her tracks. She didn't think I'd ever look. I started preparing for the fallout, planning every move meticulously. I contacted a divorce lawyer, discreetly. I didn't need legal advice just yet, but I wanted to know my options. What would happen if I took full custody of Evan? Would I be able to cut her off financially? What legal grounds did I have with the DNA test? The lawyer was thorough, careful with his words, but I could tell he knew I was on the verge of something big. I just wasn't ready to pull the trigger yet. There was still a part of me that needed more time to process. I didn't want to act impulsively, even if every cell in my body screamed for revenge. The cold, calculated part of me, the part that had been building over the past few weeks, knew that if I rushed this, I'd make mistakes, and I couldn't afford any mistakes. But then Emily began to notice something was off. I wasn't good at hiding it, I guess. I'd catch her watching me out of the corner of her eye, a slight furrow in her brow as if she were trying to figure me out. She asked more questions than usual, about work, about my mood, about why I was staying late at the office. She started picking at my routine, like a scab she couldn't stop scratching. One night, while we were sitting in the living room, she turned to me and asked, "Is everything okay, Daniel? You've been different lately." I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on the TV, pretending to be engrossed in the news. "I'm fine," I said, my voice steady. "Just work stress." It was a lie, but a believable one. I'd used it 100 times before, and she'd always accepted it. But this time, she didn't. She leaned forward, her hand reaching for mine, and I had to force myself not to pull away. I don't want us to drift apart," she said softly, her voice laced with false concern. "You can talk to me, you know. About anything." The irony of her words was almost too much to bear. I had to fight the urge to laugh, to call her out right there and then, but I didn't. Instead, I nodded, squeezing her hand just enough to reassure her. "I know," I said. "I'll be fine." She watched me for a moment longer, her eyes searching my face, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. She didn't believe me. Not completely. But she couldn't push too hard, not without giving herself away. That was the complication I hadn't foreseen. I'd been so focused on watching her, on building my case, that I hadn't considered how my own behavior might tip her off. I'd grown colder, more distant, and she was starting to notice. If I wasn't careful, she'd catch on, and I couldn't let that happen. Not yet. I had to be smarter, more careful. I couldn't rush this, so I adapted. I started playing the part of the attentive husband again. I brought her flowers one night after work, made a big show of cooking dinner for the family, all while silently seething inside. I kissed her goodnight, touched her the way I used to, pretended everything was back to normal. And it worked. Slowly, I saw her relax. The suspicion faded from her eyes and she stopped asking questions. She thought I was letting go, that I'd gone back to being the man I used to be. But I was still watching, still planning. And then, one night, I discovered something that changed everything. I was going through her phone again, scrolling through old messages, when I found an email from a few years ago. It was from someone I didn't recognize, but the tone was familiar, intimate. The kind of intimacy that comes with years of shared secrets. I clicked on the thread and started reading, and that's when I realized this wasn't just about the man in the video. This had been going on for years. Multiple men, multiple affairs, some long-term, some fleeting. But always, always hidden from me. My heart pounded in my chest as I scrolled through the messages, piecing together the timeline. She had been cheating on me for almost a decade. This wasn't a single lapse in judgment or even a few bad choices. This was who she was. This was the life she'd been living, right under my nose. The realization hit me like a freight train, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the anger rise up again. Hot, searing anger. I wanted to storm upstairs, drag her out of bed, and confront her right then and there. I wanted to scream at her, make her feel the weight of every lie she'd told, every betrayal, but I didn't. I couldn't. This was bigger than I'd realized. It wasn't just about her cheating on me. It was about the years of deceit, the lies she'd told to everyone around her. To me, to Evan, to our friends, our family. She had built an entire life on a foundation of lies. And now, I was going to tear it all down. The plan I'd been crafting in my head suddenly seemed too small. I couldn't just confront her with the DNA test and the footage. That would be too easy, too clean. I needed to dismantle everything she'd built. I needed to make her feel the same kind of betrayal she'd made me feel. I started with her work. I had access to her emails now, and it didn't take long to find something I could use. A few inappropriate messages sent to a colleague, nothing too explicit, but enough to raise eyebrows. I forwarded them to her boss, anonymously of course. It was a small step, but it was just the beginning. Next, I froze our joint bank account. She didn't notice right away. She had her own account, one I'd found buried in our financials, where she'd been hiding money from me. But it wouldn't take long for her to realize she was locked out. Finally, I started leaking the footage. I didn't send it to anyone directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I posted it online, anonymously, letting it spread like wildfire. It didn't take long for it to reach the right people, her colleagues, her friends, even her family. Emily's carefully constructed life was starting to crumble, and she had no idea that I was the one behind it. I watched her over the next few days, waiting for the moment she would realize something was wrong. And when it came, it was glorious. She found out about the bank account first. I came home to find her pacing the living room, her phone clutched in her hand, her face flushed with frustration. "Daniel, did you freeze the account?" she demanded, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. I shrugged, playing dumb. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Her eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering back to life. But she couldn't prove anything. Not yet. She stormed off, muttering under her breath, and I had to fight the urge to smile. The next day, the footage started circulating at her office. She came home early, her face pale, her hands shaking. She didn't say a word to me, just locked herself in the bedroom, the sound of her sobs muffled through the door. I stood in the hallway listening. I should have felt something, guilt maybe, or satisfaction, but all I felt was numb, cold. It was working. I was tearing her life apart, piece by piece, just like she'd done to me, and I wasn't finished yet. Emily's downfall began quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. It started with the credit cards. She'd gone shopping, probably to ease whatever tension had built from my colder, distant demeanor, and when she went to swipe her card, it was declined. Twice. The first call came to me, of course, but I let it ring. I was at work, or at least that's what my voicemail told her. She left me a message, sounding confused, but not panicked yet. By the time I got home, she'd tried every card, every account. I walked through the door to find her on the phone with the bank, her voice tight with growing frustration. "No, that's impossible," she was saying. "There must be some mistake." I stood in the doorway, watching her unravel in real time. She didn't see me right away, too focused on the bank's explanations. Her back was to me, and for a moment I just stood there, savoring it, the way her perfect, controlled world was beginning to crack. Finally, she hung up, slamming the phone down on the counter with a curse. That's when she noticed me. "Daniel," she said, a forced smile plastered on her face. "I was just talking to the bank. There's been some sort of issue with our accounts. They're all frozen. Can you believe that?" I could. I'd done it. But I kept my face neutral, pretending to be surprised. "I'll call them tomorrow," I said, brushing past her, heading upstairs as if it were the least of my concerns. I could feel her eyes boring into my back, suspicion starting to blossom. She wasn't an idiot. She knew something was wrong. But she didn't know how wrong yet. The next blow came the following day. Her work. She'd always prided herself on her professionalism, her spotless reputation. She was the golden girl at her office, the one everyone relied on, the one who always had everything under control. Except now, she didn't. The emails I'd forwarded had made their way to her boss. Nothing explicit enough to get her fired on the spot, but damning enough to warrant an investigation. And in her line of work, even the hint of impropriety was a death sentence. I was at home when she came through the door that afternoon. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. I didn't need to ask what had happened. I already knew. "Daniel," she called from the hallway, her voice strained. I stayed where I was, sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for her to come to me. When she finally appeared in the doorway, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. "They," she started, then stopped, struggling to find the words. "They think I've been inappropriate at work with a colleague." I raised an eyebrow, pretending to be confused. "Inappropriate how?" "They're investigating me," she said, her voice breaking. "There were emails from my account, but I swear, Daniel, it's not what it looks like. I never—" She stopped, her eyes searching mine, looking for some sign of understanding, of belief, but I gave her nothing. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding," I said, standing up from the table. "These things happen." She looked at me, her mouth slightly open, like she was trying to process my lack of concern. The suspicion was back in her eyes now, stronger this time. She didn't say anything, just nodded slowly, her mind clearly racing. That night I listened to her cry in the shower. The sound of it should have broken me, I suppose, should have stirred something in me, but all I felt was cold. The colder she became, the more detached I was. The next morning, I struck the final blow. The footage. The videos I'd posted online had made their way to her office, of course, but now I made sure her family saw them. Her friends. I leaked them to the same social circles she'd spent years cultivating. They were everywhere now, grainy, shaky clips of her and the various men she'd invited into our home, into our bed. Every shameful, intimate detail was on display for the world to see. Emily didn't come home that night. She called once, her voice desperate, but I didn't pick up. I let it go to voicemail, listened to the shaky message she left me, her pleas to talk, to explain. But I wasn't interested in explanations. I already knew the truth. When she finally did come home the next day, she was a shell of the woman I'd known. She didn't even bother pretending anymore. The confident, composed facade was gone. She looked at me as if I were a stranger, her eyes hollow, her face drawn. "You did this," she said quietly, standing in the doorway of our bedroom. It wasn't a question. I didn't deny it. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Why are you doing this to me?" I looked at her for a long moment, feeling the weight of everything that had passed between us. The lies, the betrayals, the years of deceit that she had woven into the fabric of our lives. "Because you deserve it," I said finally, my voice calm, steady. She flinched like I'd slapped her. For a second, I thought she might fight back, scream, throw something, beg for forgiveness. But she didn't. She just stood there, staring at me, her eyes empty. And then she left. I heard her pack a bag, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the house as she gathered the last remnants of her life. When the door finally clicked shut behind her, I sat in the silence, feeling the weight of it settle over me. It was over. Or at least it should have been. The satisfaction I'd expected, the closure, I thought it would come crashing over me in waves, drowning out the pain, the anger. But it didn't. I felt nothing. I'd won. I'd destroyed her life, just as she'd destroyed mine. But there was no victory in it, no sense of justice or peace, just emptiness. For a few days, I waited for something to change. I expected Emily to come back, to try and fight for Evan, for what little she had left. But she didn't. She stayed away, completely disappearing from our lives as though she'd never existed. I should have felt relief. After all, I had Evan now. He was mine, fully. I had everything I'd set out to achieve. But when I looked at my son, when I tucked him in at night, something was missing. The bond I'd thought was unbreakable had been fractured, the cracks spreading through every interaction, every conversation. He didn't understand what was happening, and I didn't know how to explain it to him. I barely knew how to explain it to myself. The days turned into weeks, and still the emptiness remained. I went through the motions of my life, work, taking care of Evan, keeping the house in order. But everything felt mechanical, hollow. The revenge that had consumed me for so long, the thing that had driven me forward, now that it was done, I had nothing left. One night, as I stood in the doorway of Evan's room, watching him sleep, I realized what I had become. I'd spent so much time destroying Emily's life that I hadn't noticed how much of mine had been destroyed in the process. I was no longer the man I'd been before. I was something else now, something colder, emptier. I thought back to the first time I'd caught her, the sickening feeling that had curled inside me, the slow, methodical way I'd planned her downfall. It had seemed justified then, necessary even. But now, I couldn't remember why. I turned away from Evan's room, walking down the hall to my office. The folder was still there, sitting on my desk, filled with all the evidence I'd gathered, all the proof of Emily's betrayal, of her lies. I stared at it for a long time, the weight of it pressing down on me. What had it all been for? I didn't know anymore. I closed the folder, locking it away in a drawer, and sat back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, too quiet. The silence pressed in on me, suffocating, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the edges of guilt creep in. Not for what I'd done to Emily. She deserved that. But for what I'd lost in the process. Myself, my son, everything. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't stay. Not here, not in this house, with its memories, its ghosts. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay, that I could just move on from this. I couldn't be the father Evan needed me to be. I couldn't be anyone, really. I packed a bag quietly that night, slipping out of the house while Evan slept. I didn't leave a note. There was nothing to say. No explanation I could give that would make sense. I just left. As I drove away, disappearing into the darkness, I felt nothing. I thought leaving would bring me peace, that driving away from everything, Emily, Evan, the life I had dismantled, would give me the closure I'd been chasing. But the truth settled in slowly, suffocating me like the darkness outside the windshield. I had left, but I hadn't escaped. There was no escaping the mess I'd created. I couldn't outrun it. The first few days were a blur. I drove aimlessly, stopping only when exhaustion overtook me. Cheap motels, anonymous highways. Each morning I'd wake up hoping the numbness would lift, that I'd feel something, anything. But all I had was silence. A dull, hollow ache in the center of my chest, like the heart I thought I'd protected had rotted out. I kept waiting for the anger, the satisfaction, but nothing came. I'd gotten my revenge. Emily's life was in ruins. She had no job, no friends, no respect left. The court had awarded me full custody of Evan. The DNA results had sealed that fate. No judge was going to side with her after she'd lied about something so fundamental. She'd begged, pleaded in court, saying she'd made a mistake, that she was still Evan's mother, that she still loved him. But the law didn't care about love when betrayal was this deep. That moment in the courtroom should have felt like a victory. Watching her crumble under the weight of her lies, knowing I'd orchestrated every step of her downfall, should have filled me with triumph. But it hadn't. I just felt disconnected, like I was watching someone else's life play out on a screen. I called my lawyer a few days after I left just to make sure Evan was being cared for. "He's with your sister," she told me, her voice a mix of concern and professionalism. "You know she's going to ask where you are, right? Everyone is." "I know," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Tell her I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. I hadn't been fine for a long time. I spent the next few weeks moving from place to place, always staying just long enough to feel uncomfortable. No one knew where I was. No one could. I couldn't face them. Not my sister, not Evan, especially not Evan. Every time I thought about him, the guilt tightened around my chest like a vice. He was the one thing that had been pure in all of this. He'd trusted me, and I'd abandoned him. Left him with questions I didn't have answers for. I tried to convince myself that it was better this way. That Evan would be better off without me. That Emily, for all her faults, would eventually get her life back on track, and maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to rebuild without me. But I knew it was a lie. I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing it for myself. I'd torn everything apart, and now I couldn't face the wreckage. The paranoia started creeping in not long after. At first, it was just small things, feeling like I was being watched, like someone was following me. I brushed it off as stress. But the more I thought about it, the worse it got. I started checking the rearview mirror constantly, scanning every face in every diner, every gas station, wondering if someone knew who I was, what I'd done. Was Emily looking for me? Had she figured it out? That I'd been the one to destroy her so methodically, so thoroughly? She had to know. I'd left enough breadcrumbs for her to follow. And maybe she had friends, connections I didn't know about. Maybe one of those men I'd found in her emails would come looking for revenge of his own. It wasn't just Emily I had to worry about. One night, in some no-name motel off the highway, I bolted up in bed, sure I'd heard something outside the door. My heart raced, sweat dripping down my back as I listened for any hint of movement, but there was nothing. Just the hum of the vending machines in the hallway, the distant sound of a truck passing by. I hadn't been sleeping well for days. The dreams were the worst part. I'd see Emily's face, not the hollowed-out version of her I'd left, but the one from years ago. The Emily I'd married. The one who laughed with me, who smiled in that way that made everything feel okay. In the dreams, she'd reach out to me, her eyes full of something I couldn't understand, pleading maybe, or accusation, and I'd wake up gasping for breath, unsure if I was still the man who loved her or the man who'd destroyed her. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd lost control of everything. The revenge, the plan, it had all seemed so perfect when I'd set it in motion. But now it felt like it had spiraled out of my hands, taking me down with it. I'd wanted control, but all I had now was chaos. One morning, a week into my self-imposed exile, I found myself parked outside a small-town diner. I hadn't slept in over 24 hours, my hands shaking as I wrapped them around a cup of black coffee. The waitress asked me twice if I was okay, her eyes flicking to the dark circles under mine. I nodded, gave her a tight smile, but I could see the worry in her face. I didn't belong here. I didn't belong anywhere anymore. By the time I walked back to my car, I knew I couldn't keep running. The paranoia was suffocating, and I had no idea where to go. No purpose. The plan had given me something to focus on, something to drive me. But now that it was over, I was just lost. I started the engine, my mind a fog of conflicting thoughts. What was I doing? Where was I going? Every mile I put between myself and Evan only made the ache in my chest worse, the sense of loss deeper. I'd won the battle, but at what cost? I hadn't just torn Emily's life apart, I'd torn my own apart in the process. I found myself driving back toward the city, the highway stretching out in front of me like an endless reminder of the choices I'd made. I passed exit after exit, not knowing where I was headed, just that I needed to stop. To confront what I'd done, to face the consequences, whatever they were. As I neared the outskirts of the city, I pulled over at a rest stop, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few cars scattered around, their occupants probably inside grabbing snacks or using the restroom. I sat there, staring at the dashboard, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. I couldn't go back to Evan, not yet. But I couldn't keep running either. The guilt was eating me alive, and the longer I stayed away, the worse it would get. I thought about calling my sister, but what could I say? That I was sorry? That I didn't know how to be a father anymore? I got out of the car, the cool evening air biting at my skin as I leaned against the hood, staring out at the empty highway. I could hear the faint sound of traffic in the distance, but it felt like I was the only person in the world. Maybe I'd always been alone. Maybe that was the real truth. Emily's betrayal had shattered my illusion of what our life had been, but maybe the cracks had always been there, long before I noticed them. And now, I'd become something worse than her. Cold, detached, broken. The truth was, I didn't know how to fix what I'd done. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to. I stayed at the rest stop for hours, watching the sun sink below the horizon, the sky turning dark as headlights from passing cars flickered in and out of view. Eventually, I got back in the car, knowing that wherever I went next, it wouldn't be home, because home didn't exist anymore. Not for me. Not for the man I'd become. I started the engine again, the hum of the car the only sound in the silence. I didn't know where I was going, but it didn't matter. I was just moving. The road stretched on, a ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the night, but I barely noticed it. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, but my mind was somewhere else, drifting, lost in the wreckage I'd left behind. The emptiness had swallowed me whole, the satisfaction I'd expected replaced by a hollow ache that pulsed with every passing mile. I was moving, but not towards anything. I was just disappearing. I thought about Evan, about the last time I'd seen him, sleeping peacefully, his small body curled under the covers. I'd stood in his doorway, watching him breathe, feeling the weight of everything I'd done pressing down on me. He didn't know, couldn't understand the storm that had torn through his life. I told myself that by leaving I was sparing him. But deep down, I knew it was a lie. I wasn't sparing anyone. I was running. Evan had been the only thing that mattered. I'd fought for him, taken him away from Emily, stripped her of custody with the DNA results, thinking it was the final piece of my revenge. And it was. But I hadn't anticipated how it would feel, having him, but not really having him. I couldn't even look him in the eye without seeing all the ways I'd failed. Not just as a husband, but as a father. I'd won, hadn't I? That's what this was supposed to be. Victory. Emily was broken. Her life was shattered beyond repair. She had nothing left. I'd taken her career, her reputation, her son. And yet, as I drove further away from everything, all I could feel was the weight of what I'd destroyed. I hadn't just ruined her, I'd ruined myself. I was a ghost now, drifting through the shell of the man I used to be, the man who once thought love and loyalty mattered. I passed a road sign. Another town, another stretch of highway I didn't recognize. It didn't matter. The world outside the car was as empty as I was. I kept driving, feeling the cold seep in through the cracks, the spaces where my revenge had once burned hot, now replaced by a numbness that clung to me like fog. I thought about calling my sister, about hearing her voice. Maybe that's what I needed, to hear someone remind me I was still real, that there was still something human left in me. But what would I say? I couldn't explain what I'd done, couldn't make her understand why I'd left Evan. She'd ask questions. She'd want answers I didn't have. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking as I scrolled through the contacts, landing on her name. I stared at it for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the call button. But then I remembered the look in Evan's eyes the last time I'd seen him awake. That silent question, "Why are you so far away, Dad?" Though he never said the words. I could see it, feel it, and it clawed at me now, sharper than any regret I'd ever known. I put the phone back down. What would be the point of calling her? She didn't know this version of me, this hollowed-out thing that had crawled out of the wreckage of my marriage. This man who'd let his need for revenge consume him so completely, he'd lost everything that once mattered. I wasn't her brother anymore. I wasn't Evan's father anymore. I wasn't even Daniel. I was a shadow. And shadows don't need to make phone calls. The road stretched on and I drove through the night, my headlights cutting through the dark, the miles blurring into each other. Eventually, I pulled off at a gas station, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as I filled up the tank. I caught a glimpse of myself in the window, a reflection I didn't recognize. My face was pale, drawn, my eyes sunken, haunted. I hadn't shaved in days. There were dark circles under my eyes, the kind that didn't go away with sleep. I looked like a man running from something, but the truth was, I was running from nothing. There was nothing left to run from. I got back in the car and sat there for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, my mind spinning in circles. What was I doing? Where was I going? The answers eluded me, slipping through my fingers like sand. All I had was the gnawing certainty that wherever I was headed, it wasn't going to be home. Because home didn't exist anymore. Eventually, I started the engine again and pulled back onto the highway. The road was quiet, empty, and the only sound was the hum of the tires on the asphalt. The world felt far away, like I was drifting through it without touching anything real. I thought about Evan again, about his laughter, his innocent questions, the way he used to run into my arms when I came home from work. That little boy trusted me once. And I'd betrayed him, just like Emily had betrayed me. In the end, we were all liars. I told myself I was doing this for him, that I was saving him from Emily, from the lies she'd woven into our lives. But now I couldn't help but wonder if I'd just been saving myself. And in doing so, I damned us both. I kept driving, the night growing darker, the road stretching endlessly in front of me. Time blurred, and before I knew it, the sun was rising, casting a pale light over the horizon. I pulled over again, this time at a small overlook off the highway, the car idling as I stared out at the landscape below. It was beautiful, in a way, vast and untouched, the kind of place that made you feel small, insignificant, and maybe that's what I was, insignificant. Just a man who'd spent too much time believing he could control the world around him, who thought he could bend people to his will, make them pay for their sins. But in the end, all I'd done was destroy myself. I turned off the engine and stepped out of the car, the cool morning air biting at my skin. I walked to the edge of the overlook and stared down at the valley below. The silence was deafening, the kind of quiet that made you confront the things you'd been trying to bury. I stood there for a long time, just listening to it, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. I could keep running. I could disappear completely, vanish into the same nothingness that had consumed me. I'd already taken the first step. All I had to do was keep going. No one would find me. No one would look for me. I'd become a ghost, just like I'd wanted. But Evan would never understand. He'd never know why I left. He'd grow up wondering, asking questions no one could answer. And maybe that was the worst kind of betrayal, abandoning him, just like I felt Emily had abandoned me. I thought about turning back, driving home, facing the wreckage I'd left behind. But the truth was, I didn't know if there was anything left to return to. I didn't know if I had the strength to pick up the pieces of the life I'd destroyed. Maybe that was the real price of revenge. Not the destruction of others, but the destruction of yourself. The wind picked up, cold and sharp, cutting through the thin jacket I'd thrown on. I shoved my hands into my pockets, staring out at the horizon, wondering if this was it, if this was all there was left for me. A life spent running, searching for something I couldn't even name. I'd taken everything from Emily. I'd won, but I'd lost myself in the process. I turned back to the car, my footsteps slow, heavy. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time, I realized it didn't matter. I could drive forever, but I'd never find what I was looking for, because what I'd been searching for, peace, closure, redemption, didn't exist. Not for me, not anymore. I slid into the driver's seat, turned the key in the ignition, and pulled back onto the road. The highway stretched out in front of me, endless and empty, and as I drove away, the sun rising in the rearview mirror, I realized I was already gone. And maybe that's all I'd ever be now, just gone.